Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree features over 75 bosses, mini-bosses, and named enemies. It's an absolutely jam-packed DLC, filled with memorable encounters, challenging moments, and a fair share of frustration to boot. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today I'm ranking the top 10 bosses in Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. Whenever we do a rankings video, I always like to start with a disclaimer. In the case of Elden Ring, there's a few things that need to be said out loud. For starters, there are going to be spoilers. That should be pretty clear, given that we're talking about 10 of the best boss fights in the game. Second, this is a list based on my own experience. They are opinions, and you're most likely going to disagree with them. That's fine. In fact, that's one of the beautiful things about Elden Ring. A boss that's tough for you might be a breeze for me, and vice versa. So let's talk about that in the comments. Third, there's no right or wrong way to kill a boss. Oonga Boonga build, Mimic tier, Cheese build, I really don't care. You do you and play the way you want to play, and don't let the internet tell you otherwise. Finally, this list was compiled based on a few different factors, including how difficult a boss was for me to defeat, the overall immersion of the boss, and the actual fight mechanics itself. First up, a quick honorable mention to my boy, the Black Jail Knight, who became a meme faster than anything we've ever seen on the internet. Talk about a trap, Miyazaki was an absolute fiend for putting this boss a stone's throw away from the first sight of grace, because he's an absolute tank. I'd love to know how many kills this singular boss alone has, because without Erdtree blessings, he hits like an absolute truck. For such a seemingly boring boss, the moveset and the overall welcome to the Shadow Realm vibes he gives off just absolutely sold me on the game within the first hour, and he'll forever hold a special place in my heart. Alright, let's start this thing off for real. At number 10, I have to give this spot to Needle Knight Leda and her allies. I'll be honest, I really wasn't expecting to have this fight, and of course, everyone's going to say they saw it coming now, but to be honest, when I walked up the stairs and saw her standing there, I was genuinely shocked. As far as the fight itself is concerned, well, it's really not that hard. Anyone who's experienced it would most likely agree, but it does depend on how many summons you can call to your aid. In my case, I had both Tholier and Saranspach, as well as my Mimic tier, so it was a much more even fight, but I can see it getting a bit overwhelming if we were in a different situation. Ultimately, I think this gets the number 10 spot because it was unexpected, a decent culmination of the various NPCs that are in the DLC, and the overall surprise factor actually having to face your supposed allies. You couldn't design a better introductory boss fight than the Divine Beast Dancing Lion. It is a show-stopping encounter, and it's one of the first you face within the game. The boss combines a lot of unique elements, but one of the things that stands out the most is the way it moves. It's reminiscent of an ulcerated tree spirit, but without all the BS that we associated with that enemy. The arena is bigger, and the boss isn't quite as large as the tree spirit, and that does help keep things balanced. The real reason this fight made it on the list is the Phase 2 mechanics. When lightning storms and frost novas start swirling around, the fight takes a turn and really adopts a new identity. This is the chaos that I love with Fromsoft games, and the process of being able to actually see the mechanics through the chaos is what I always love about figuring out a specific boss. Divine Beast Dancing Lion leans on all of the best Fromsoft Souls mechanics, and it's a memorable fight to boot. Next on the list is the Erdtree Avatar, or the Massive Killer Sunflower. I'm not sure how everyone else feels about this fight, but I actually really enjoyed it because it was a multi-phase fight that used the massive arena effectively. I wasn't necessarily expecting to fight a giant plant as a major boss within Shadow Keep, but it's those surprising moments that I often find the most enjoyable in a FromSoft game. Given the uniqueness of the boss, I thought it actually had a pretty cool moveset. The boss is massive, so you have those chunky slam attacks, but the Avatar is also wickedly agile, and when it starts sliding across the map, that changes the dynamic of the fight. There are also a number of magical attacks that keep you on your guard even if the boss is all the way on the other side of the arena, and all of those things combined really add up to an interesting fight. You can't have a DLC top 10 list without including Commander Gaius. I hated this fight, much like a lot of people around the internet, and I'm not ashamed to admit I just wanted to get through it. There are certain fights I really enjoy learning the ins and outs of, and there are others I just want to complete as fast as possible, and this was one of them. A lot of over-the-top animations, particle effect, jerky movements, delayed attacks, I mean, the list really does drag on. You have so much space to maneuver in the arena, but it hardly matters because the boss is on top of you from the second you engage. A lot of players I've seen are using the corner of the castle to cheese the boss, and I get it because it's frustrating to get hung up on such a frustrating and annoying enemy. That being said, you have to tip your hat when you're met with a formidable challenge, and Commander Gaia certainly achieves that. Just when you think there can't be a bigger dragon, there's Baal the Dread. I don't know if you can call him the King of the Dragons, God of the Dragons, I really don't know, but he's big, he's mean, he uses a shit ton of lightning, and the music to accompany the fight is absolutely legendary. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of mid-dragon fights in Elden Ring, and the fact that you have to cut down like 30 Ghost Flame dragons throughout the DLC just to get to this point makes me totally okay to never see another dragon again. But damn it if we did not go out on top. You talk about setting you up for an epic encounter, the whole run-up to the boss arena is littered with dragon bodies, and it definitely plants a seed of doubt in your mind. The higher you ascend on the mountain, the more lightning cracks around you, and it all leads to one of the largest dragon fights ever in any game ever, and that's notable. One of my favorite fights from an aesthetic point of view, Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame, is just fantastic, and it all starts with the setup. There's an enemy impaled with this golden spinal column looking thing, you smack him around a bit, and then you get one of the most memorable cutscenes in the DLC. That build-up alone, as simple as it was, really sold me on the fight, but then you actually have to fight the boss itself, and that just elevates it even further. Madness and the Frenzied Flame was such a huge part of the base game, and for it to be largely absent from the DLC was a bit of a shock, but then you get to Midra and it all makes sense. From the first seconds you enter the Abyssal Woods to the final moments clearing out Midra's Manse, that sense of fear, dread, and yes, madness really was captured well in such a memorable location within the game. Midra is definitely an underappreciated boss at this point, but it certainly makes my list as a top 5. Endless attack combinations and the ability to close the gap and keep pressure on, the Putrescent Knight easily takes the number 4 spot on my list. The buildup is part of this experience, and that leap of faith you have to take just to engage the boss is certainly an aspect that adds to the intensity of the overall encounter. Then you actually have to fight the boss, and it's a wild learning curve. So many attacks strung together back to back, you feel like you're constantly rolling, and while that's definitely a theme of this DLC, I think it's most egregious with this boss. Luckily, there are some windows where you can score damage, but they're usually immediately followed up by some crazy lightning attack. I do genuinely like this fight. I thought it was unique, frustrating, satisfying to overcome, all the things I look for in a boss fight. You also can't ignore the fact that the leap of faith and the actual arena are also both pretty cool. If there's one fight that perfectly captures the difficulty of Shadow of the Erdtree, it's the final boss, Promised Consort Radahn and Consort of Miquella. There's no denying that this DLC features some of the most challenging boss encounters across all Fromsoft titles, and the reason for that is a combination of the damage output and the insane combinations of abilities that constantly barrage the player. Phase 1 of this fight isn't terrible, especially if you lean into the various summons which distract Radahn while you chip away at his health. Where things get absolutely bonkers is in Phase 2 when Miquella joins the fight. Not only does Radahn keep his already expansive moveset, but a ton of faith-infused melee and magical attacks start to enter into the picture. It's chaotic from the second the phase begins, and watching some of the incredible players around the internet beat this without taking damage is truly impressive, because I could quite literally feel the anxiety welling up the longer the fight dragged on. This fight's overall difficulty is top-notch, but the overall immersion actually leaves a lot to be desired. I won't get into any of the lore stuff here, but there's a reason this end DLC boss doesn't rank higher on the list, and that's because it did leave me feeling a bit hollow once the fight was over. That's all I'll say for now. Coming in at the number 2 spot is R'hllana the Twin Moon Knight. I think this fight perfectly captures that tipping point that Fromsoft games managed to create so perfectly. You're still a bit underpowered when you fight her, so trying to take her on feels like an insurmountable task. Maybe it forces you to change up your build, call in a friend, whatever the case may be, it truly feels like a boss fight. What I also love about this fight is how simple it is on paper. I'm sure you've seen the videos of players defeating her at level 1, and that's because you can simply parry and execute her until she's defeated. But if you don't approach the game that way, it feels like an absolute slog. I remember the first time she used that double moon slam sorcery at the end of the fight, you quite literally had to pick my jaw up off the floor because it was just that epic. Once you finally defeat R'Lana, you're rewarded accordingly with access to her sword and that same sorcery, which is the perfect prize for overcoming such a challenging boss. At the top of my list is none other than Mesmer the Impaler. Everything about this fight was just perfect in my opinion, and while not the end boss of the DLC, it felt like the most climactic and cinematic. For starters, you spend hours scouring Shadow Keep, and that build-up does matter. You know you're heading towards some sort of epic boss fight, and the higher you climb, the more apparent that becomes until eventually you meet the face of the DLC himself. On top of that, Mesmer's moveset is just wickedly fun to deal with. His weapon acts as both a sword and a spear, and for the most part, I didn't find his moves to be as blatantly BS as some of the other bosses in the game. He was far from predictable, but the tuning felt more true to previous Fromsoft games. When he kicks things into high gear with his fire attacks, and then especially in Phase 2, things just get off the rails, and that ramping difficulty and intensity just brings the fight to new heights. This was an easy pick, and will go down as one of my favorite Fromsoft fights until, inevitably, Miyazaki cooks up another wicked encounter. So there you have it, my top 10 boss fights in Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. What did you think of our list? Let us know in the comments below, and share your favorite boss memories from the DLC. As always, if you want more Elden Ring and videos like this in your feed, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up, and consider subscribing. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.